Hello and welcome back to Inclusive Design 24, 2021, or indeed welcome if this is the first session that you're tuning into. My name is Henny Swan and I'm based in Brighton in the UK. And so far we've had talks really following the sunrise coming from Australia, Japan, India, Finland, and now we're in the UK where quite a few of our presenters and co-hosts have been presenting from their sheds, but not myself today. ID24 is brought to you in partnership with our Platinum supporters, Intopia, Fable, ARC, Adobe, and Gold supporter Tetralogical. You can follow us on Twitter at ID24Conf, C-N-O-F. And if you have any questions for our presenter today, tweet them using the ID24 hashtag for our Q&A at the end of the session. I am very happy to introduce my co-host, Steve Faulkner, and I shall turn it over to him now. You're muted, Steve.
Hello.
I am very happy to introduce my
I'm hearing echoes.
Steve Faulkner, and I shall turn it over to him now.
She turned it over to me. Hello, and welcome to this session of ID24. We have a very interesting talk from Daniel Montalvo of the W3C.
Have you got the YouTube video open, Steve? If so, can you close it?
Hello, and welcome to this session of ID24. We have a very interesting talk from Daniel. I don't know where it's coming from. I'm sorry.
Have you got the YouTube video open, Steve? If so, can you close it?
Well, I thought oh yeah, I do. There you go. It was me all along. I was blaming Henny. Welcome. And this is ID24, as we all know. And we have a talk by Daniel Montalvo from the W3C next. I will just find out what it is. Yeah. Hey, I like that, Thomas. Curricula on web accessibility, build, compare, and select courses on web accessibility. Really looking forward to it. Take it away, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Henny, Steve, Patrick. Thank you very much, ID24, for accepting this presentation and for having me today. It is my pleasure to present this project, the Web Accessibility Curricula from W3C WAY. And just for the captioners, W3C WAY stands for World Wide Web Consortium Web Accessibility Initiative, and it's written all in caps. So I will be saying W3C WAY through this presentation, so kind of as a matter of for the captioners to be aware that this is how it's written. And if there's any other acronym that I come across, which probably will be, I'll try to spell that out for you as well. So without further ado, let's start. So the curricula on web accessibility helps you compare. Sorry about that. This should be the one. Let's start from the beginning. So the WAY curricula, the Web Accessibility Initiative curricula, is a framework to build your own courses. It helps you build the courses. It helps you compare and select proposed courses. And it can give you also the chance to compare and select or write your own procurement needs based on your training needs. So the use cases that we identified for this curricula are several ones. In the context of university, for example, if a lecturer wants to teach accessibility and wants to include accessibility in their already existing classes, they could use this curricula. And I've been there, by the way. There's been already some university courses that I've been part of in the past before the curricula was ready. So there were attempts to include accessibility, and I wish I could have, something like this to have used that. Also, in the context of the accessibility consultancy, let's say a consultant wants to create their own courses. They, of course, have the knowledge, but they can come to this curricula and see what the recommendations are, what we recommend needs to be included, and make sure they are aligned to those requirements, just in case somebody else wants to ask for them, and be sure that they are aligned. Also, in terms of product ownership, when you want to compare between different course proposals, let's say you want to train your developers or your designers or your content authors in accessibility, and you want to know which kind of background the course proposer has, or which kind of understanding of accessibility the proposal is going to undertake, you can come to the curricula to see actually what we say about this and how the pieces of the curricula actually fit together with the proposed course. And also in terms of procurement, as I was saying before, when it comes to writing your own proposal, so it's not just that you select between several other existing proposals, but you may need to write your specific training requirements. You can base those requirements, for example, on the learning outcomes in this curricula that we will be discussing later on. So you could say, hey, I want to make sure the courses really cover how people with disabilities use the web, and this is in the learning outcomes of the curricula from the Web Accessibility Initiative. So yeah, hopefully that's a nice must that you can put there to make sure your courses actually fit your expectations. Let me first of all describe the planned curricula that we have. This is a project that started back in 2019, and it's gonna extend through early 2022. So the first thing we had in mind, and we have already published, is the foundation modules, which are recommended for all roles. This is an overall introduction to web accessibility. It's really about how people with disabilities use the web, and it gives you some hints to get started with accessibility as well, if you're not very familiar, but also gives some nice pointers for people who've been working on accessibility for many, many years, but for whatever reason, they need a refresh on that one. So I'll be getting to those details later on. After that introduction, there's the developers curriculum that we published last year. We published that early 2020, sorry. Actually, early 2021, so I'm right at the end of the day. So the developer modules primarily focuses on markup and coding techniques. These are more aimed for front-end developers and people writing code. And this covers from page structure to rich applications and custom widgets. As I said, we're going to get into those later on in the presentation. Then the designing modules we're working on them at the moment. We had a first draft. We are including some of the changes that were suggested by the Education and Outreach Working Group. So we plan to have those changes ready in the coming weeks for further iteration. And the designing modules focuses mainly on visual design, user experience, and interaction design. And then the last part, the author modules that we have an early concept draft that we need to develop a little bit more through next months, are the ones primarily focusing on content creation, including multimedia. So those writers, those content creators, those people who are in charge of updating the website will probably benefit from this curricula. So the structure of the curricula, just for people to be aware and what the things, the bits and pieces they are going to find on those. We have structure this based on roles that we were discussing before, and this was mainly to facilitate the use of different parts depending on your audience. So you may be needing to train developers only for a specific use case, but next course you might need to be also training developers and designers because you're going to rebuild the website, so all of them need to work together. So the roles approach, we thought it was the most beneficial for everybody, so that you can take the bits and pieces you need for your specific use cases. Then we decided to organize that in a modular basis so that it's granular, so that you can decide about the specifics you want to teach and how you want to teach that. And it's easy for you to just complete the ones you're actually interested. So for example, there are modules discussing the business case of accessibility. There are other modules discussing the principles. There are modules discussing what is web accessibility, kind of the very introduction. So you could decide, depending on your needs, what are the modules, which of the modules you're gonna pick. Then underneath the modules, we have the topics, and these ones are a little bit more of a guidance for people who are new to training accessibility, and that gives you an idea about the teaching sequence that you might want to follow. So for example, when we start discussing web accessibility at the very beginning, we have a module about introduction to web accessibility, and that has several topics. The one very first topic is about the stories of people with disabilities. So we think it's a very good start for every course to have a little bit of a glance on how people with disabilities interact with web pages. If it can be online or live or whatever, that's very good. If not, there's always videos that can show that also in great detail. So the topics are there kind of just to help you develop your teaching sequence if you ever need so. The structure in the modules, the first thing we have is the competencies section. This is kind of the prerequisites that we consider that are needed for both students and instructors to build their courses. So for instance, in the very basic first module introduction, we acknowledge, or we recommend, that people at least have some sort of awareness about accessibility, about what we're discussing, about what it means to develop in an accessible way. And then as we progress in the sequence, for example, when we go through the developers, we do think, basic HTML skills and basic CSS skills are needed. When we progress to the custom widgets development or the rich applications development, then it's not just CSS and HTML. We're requiring you to have taught or to have learned the previous modules that we had in that area. So it grows as we grow as well, this competencies section, and it can serve you as a kind of an understanding, kind of, hey, I'm really wanting to train my staff on this. I need to know what is required, or what's the first steps I need to take before even going, for example, through the developers or through the designers or authors module. Then the learning outcomes are the core part of the modules. These are based on Bloom's taxonomy, and just for people who are not familiar with that, the Bloom's taxonomy is it develops some sort of knowledge domains, and it gives you some tiers that you can base your learning outcomes on. It provides verbs, which are objectives and which are measurable. So that means later on you can use these learning outcomes for your assessment. And we're basing our learning outcomes on this, of course. This is where practically everybody in curricular design develops their learning outcomes. And there's we've really been finding issues when trying to tie the specific learning outcomes to a specific domain. So there's also literature about this, that there's some sort of ambiguity on some of the verbs. So that's something that we have taken into account, we're aware of, and we are trying to avoid that ambiguity as much as we can. Of course, accessibility being a multidisciplinary scope, that is something we're trying to avoid, but there might be some areas where still we need to look at. Then the topics to teach, we have already talked about that before. So these are kind of a more granular approach to help your teaching sequence. The ideas to assess knowledge for module are, as we say, ideas to help develop your assessment for the courses. So for example, when it comes to the developers curricula, we say it's good that the developers develop kind of a portfolio. So they start with the basic page structure, then they develop the navigation, then they develop a specific form, and after all, they end up developing a custom widget for each application. So that's kind of the portfolio. We start with the very basic, and then it develops throughout the curricula. It's not the only assessment that we have. We have several other assessments. There's some more kind of theoretical, kind of what are the required contrast ratios in the designers curricula or something. So this is basically, if you are new to this, if you have not developed accessibility courses recently, these are nice ideas that you can base on to develop your assessment. The teaching resources are, as they are said or known as the resources that you need to base your teaching on. So we provide in this curriculum the learning outcomes, the assessment, and then if we want to expand on the details, on the knowledge that we're discussing, you can go check these resources. These are mainly W3C Way resources, other resources such as the tutorials or the videos that we have, or the business case for accessibility that we also have, the how people with disabilities use the web resource that we have. So these are pointers basically for people, once again, who's new to this and want to get a finer understanding of accessibility, and then just check these resources to develop their training. So sorry about that. So in the topics, just briefly before we get into the details of the different parts of the curricula, we also have learning outcomes more granular than the ones at the module level. These are more specific depending on the specific topic that we're dealing with. We have teaching ideas. That is the new thing that we don't have at a module level, but we do have at a topic level. And this is to develop your teaching sequence. So it's not just the assessment, but also how you are going to teach a specific module. For instance, when we discuss how people with disabilities use the web, we do have specific pointers in these teaching ideas. Let's say, bring people to discuss this, if possible, to the course, and if it's not possible, use the videos. So this is guidance for those who are not probably very used to teaching, or they're not teaching accessibility, and they need this extra guidance. The ideas to assess knowledge for topic, once again, these are more granular at a topic level, so we have already discussed them. So let's get into the details of the available curricula. The first curricula, this is the foundation modules. It is already available. It's we're really hoping that you can check them and make the most out of them. They were published early 2020, so last year, and they are composed by 5 modules. So the first one is Introduction to Web Accessibility. The second one is called How People and Digital Technology. The third one is called The Business Case. The fourth one is called Principles, Standards, and Checks. And the fifth one is called Getting Started with Accessibility. And let me just walk you through the specific bits that compose the modules here. So the first one, the what is web accessibility, as we were discussing before, it kind of sets the foundations about what will be discussed through the whole curricula. It defines accessibility. It gives you a perspective of what really accessibility is about. And it gives you the opportunity to include nice pointers. And this is what our first topic is about. It's called Stories of People with Disabilities. And it's kind of a nice pointer for you as a teacher or as an instructor, which is the term we actually use, to include really real examples of people with disabilities, how they use the web, how they interact with technology, what are the main struggle, the main barriers that they're facing. So this could be done theoretically, but we don't really recommend that. We do recommend that you try to engage with people. Maybe you can reach out to an accessibility organization and say, look, I'm really bringing out, I'm putting together training. So would you be able to participate on this? Would you be able to come with me to the training session or something? So as I said, if you don't have that opportunity, there's videos on the web that you can use. I myself, as a person with disabilities, I've been doing that kind of training before. And what I did is actually combine the knowledge that I was teaching with the actual use of a screen reader myself to demonstrate how this really applies for people. So this is kind of a very first introduction, kind of a wiping appetite for people on accessibility. Then the scope of web accessibility is really a little bit more of a knowledge on what is the extension of web accessibility, what are the intersections with other disciplines such as disability and inclusion. The second module, the people and digital technology, it gets a little bit further down into the different types of barriers, the different types of abilities that people have, the different types of tools that we discuss. So we discuss then screen readers, we discuss screen magnifiers, we discuss the different types of tools. So assistive technologies that I just named, but not just that, also adaptive strategies that some people use. So that's the kind of the first topic that we had. The second one is the components of web accessibility, where we discuss mainly the intersection between browsers, assistive technologies, languages on the web. So now how all of this interacts, it will give a kind of an introduction so that people is really aware from the very beginning that there's really the need for everybody to work together. So it's not just, hey, I'm developing this website all on my own. I need to make sure this really works with assistive technologies. I need to make sure this really works with the standards that I'm basing my development on. So of course, not getting into the details of that, but just giving kind of a pointer for people, hey, this is what you need to do when you start planning, when you start developing your accessibility in your website. The business case is a little bit more oriented to product owners or managers or people who need to actually discuss how accessibility is introduced in organizations. So it gives you pointers to some of the benefits that accessibility has. So for example, enhancing your brand or increasing market reach. It points you to those benefits. It really bases on our resources that we have on that, the business case for accessibility. And it's a good starting point for people who really need to make a case for accessibility. So that's why we put that on the very first foundation modules on the curricula. The fourth one is the principles, standards, and checks. So we discuss the 4 principles of accessibility: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. We give definitions of what all of those means, and we then tie those principles to the standards that W3C Way develops. So we talk basically about WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We talk about UAC, User Agent Accessibility Guidelines. We talk about ATAG, Authoring Tools Accessibility Guidelines, and we discuss how these standards have been adopted internationally. And we also advocate a bit for the need for harmonizing standards as much as we can. So it's not that we develop the standards and we want to implement it. It's really that we believe that for a robust implementation of accessibility, standards harmonization is a really important part for people to be aware from the beginning. And then the easy checks are just very basic checks that you can perform yourself to make sure your website is accessible. So, for example, we discuss basic keyword navigation. We encourage that you in your courses teach people how to do that. We discuss basic structure and how this can be tested using a screen reader or using different browser extensions. So we give pointers for instructors to include those checks in their courses. The fifth one is the module that we said it's called Getting Started with Accessibility. It goes more to a planning environment. So people need to plan for accessibility. People need to decide what the different bits and pieces are going to look like. So the first one is a little bit on planning and managing strategies, how you can include accessibility in an organization. Then the second one, the second topic discusses the development of the different policies and statements that may be needed in different contexts. So you may need an accessibility policy for your organization so that everybody's aware of what does it mean to be accessible, what kind of the different bits and pieces are going to look like, how the different work is going to fit together. The third topic discusses a little bit more the roles and responsibilities. It gives pointers on the fact that there needs to be commitment from the whole team. So different roles need to have different responsibilities. Accessibility is really not just about somebody on a corner just developing or patching an existing product. That's not the ideal situation. The ideal situation is that everybody is involved to the degree possible. So we discuss the different roles, the main roles and their responsibilities. And then last topic, it deals with accessibility on existing projects. So how are the remediation strategies that you can use if you really need to implement accessibility in an existing project which is not developed by, or accessibility has not been implemented by default. It gives you some pointers there to make sure you actually can handle that. So the second curriculum is about the developers curriculum. It's mainly focusing on front-end development, as we were discussing. This curricula is also available. It was published earlier this year, 2021, and this one mainly discusses coding techniques and how code writing needs to be so that it is accessible and usable for everybody. So we have 7 modules here. The first one is called Page Structure, and it gives you an introduction. It gives you an idea about the different elements that are important for page structure. So we start with headings and what a good heading structure should look like and how you should implement your headings, both visually and programmatically. Then we go to discuss the different page sections on the different web pages. So how you need to mark a paragraph as a paragraph, a list as a list, a quote as a quote. We give you hints on how to code each of them, and we provide the necessary pointers for instructors to look in the available resources that we have for those subjects. Then the third topic of that module discusses page regions, so mainly basing on landmarks to differentiate the different regions on a page. And the fourth one goes a little bit more kind of a meta topic on page composition, so the other semantic elements that are needed, such as page titles, making sure they're descriptive and they're coded correctly, making sure the language of the page is actually understandable for assistive technologies, making sure the different passages of the languages are marked appropriately. So that's, as I said, kind of as a meta topic for completing the structure bits there. Then the second module we discuss is menus. This discusses mainly navigational menus, but also other types of menus. We introduce application menus. We introduce flyout menus as well, which is a subset of navigation menus. So, and we give pointers for styling them appropriately so that they're perceivable by everybody, and also coding them appropriately so that they are understood by assistive technologies. The third one is about images from a developer's perspective, because we're going to discuss images later on the designers and also on the content author's perspective. The images here, what we try to convey for a developer is that they're aware that there are different types of images, so different types of treatment for the images is required. They might be in charge of providing some of the text alternatives for those images, but not all probably. So they need to be aware that there needs to be work together with the other roles, the designer, the content author, but they, the developer, do need to be aware how an image needs to be coded. How is it possible for an image to be coded so that it's considered decorative? So all this we discuss in that specific module for images. The fourth one is about tables, and we also discuss coding techniques for tables, how table headers should be coded, which specific information should be put in the caption so that tables are accessible. We also discuss the table structure. So basically giving the developer the idea about how they need to code tables in an accessible way. We do pretty much the same for forms. We there start from the controls and labels, making sure they understand what the differences are between the different controls and how the different controls may require different labels. Then we go through overall instructions about the form, so how this need to be coded, what these instructions need to include. And then we provide hints about different types of notifications, so how error preventions need to be handled, what's the notification that is expected based on the different types of errors, etc. Then in custom widgets, which is the 6th module, we try to discuss this previous knowledge that the developer has understood on structure and navigation and everything based on the custom widgets. So we try to make that differences very clear, that if you're going to use custom code, that if you're going to use custom widgets, that really requires you to be aware that you as a developer will need to provide the necessary interactions through keyboard and the necessary compatibility through assistive technologies. So we link to some of the ARIA resources that we have there, the ARIA spec, the ARIA authoring practices. And then in rich applications, which is our 7th module, we kind of bring all of this previous knowledge together so that the developer understands how all of that fits together in the context of a rich application. So by rich application, we mean an online email composer or an online doc processor or word processor. So this really is a different thing than a kind of a static website. So we thought it was important for us to give the whole context of what was discussed previously, but in the context of this rich application. So how the different pieces fit together, how the navigation should look like, what the different kind of structure should the different components of that application have. So that's the developer modules. We are thinking mainly on courses for front-end developers, as we said above. So we think we can make the most out of these modules. Now the designer modules, this is coming soon. We are working on this. We had an early draft. We are now including some of the changes that we had agreed on based on discussions with the Education and Outreach working group. But let me just briefly give you an overview of what's coming on this one, and also on the author modules. We're now approaching the end, so I'll just be brief now. So first, we plan to have this visual design aspects. We are trying to discuss color aspects, styling aspects, cues, the visual cues that are needed for people to understand the different components of a website. Also, flexibility, how the designs really need to adapt from the very beginning to different screen sizes, screen configurations, custom-based style sheets, and that really needs to be annotated from the very beginning so that it's not too late when you try to implement this. So at a later phase. So that's kind of the first introduction from visual design there. Then we go to information design, and we discuss the different bits of structures that a page has. We discuss text, how text should be structured, how headings and landmarks should be provided both visually and programmatically. And yes, the designer might not be able to provide that programmatically because it's not really their responsibility. But what is their responsibility is to be aware of this, first of all, and second, to annotate that for future development so that developers, when they are actually coding the website, are aware that this text and the other text is a heading, or what are the different page regions. So once again, we point out that there needs to be joint work between the different roles so that the designer and the developer work together to provide these information structures. We discuss also a little bit of tables there. We discuss where and when it should be necessary for you to provide a table. We ask, instructors and designers to think twice before using complex tables and to try to provide different structures for that, such as simple tables or plain text, so that the information is actually more understandable. Then the third module is navigation design, this time from the perspective of the designer. So we do discuss the different types of navigation that exist. We have menu behaviors so that the designer can decide what's the best structure to use. And then we have distinctions between in-page and inside navigation. So navigation through the web page and navigation between different web pages on the same site. We discuss tables of contents, we discuss breadcrumb trails, we discuss the different, once again, a little bit more detailed on the different regions of the page, so that the designer really has all the key, the tools that they need in the toolbox to take the best decisions for an accessibility design. Interaction design focuses a little bit more on input methods, focuses more on keyboard, focuses more on voice input, on mouse input, also on touch input. So it tries to describe the different scenarios and how all of these need to be taken into account when designing the interactions. Images and graphics, which is the next module, focuses more on images from the designer's perspective. We discuss which kind of text alternatives are required for the different types of images. And we also discuss the thinking process that needs to be developed by the designer as to what kind of images are we going to include. Is it too much? Is it too little? Are some of the users going to be disturbed by the amount of imagery that we include? So that thinking process is also pointed out here. Then we discuss multimedia and animations, basically the planning phase, the designing, how this multimedia and animations will be appearing on the page, and how all of this is going to fit together with the rest of the web. We do discuss some sort of best practices and for animations, so that they're not really disturbing people and they not create seizures and physical reactions. And then the last one, which is forms and widgets design, we discuss forms and widgets from the designer's perspective. So we discuss the overall instructions that need to be provided, the kind of labels that are expected from a designer's perspective, the annotations that need to be done at the designer phase for the developers to then be able to code the different expectations of the user interface in an accessible way. As I said, this is coming soon. We are working on that. We hope to have that ready for later this year, 2021. And then the author modules, this is just an early concept draft. This is not the final structure. These are ideas that we're discussing within the group, and we plan to develop that through next year, through 2022. So basically, we plan to discuss here content structure. So in the previous curricula, we discussed page structure, but in the case of the authors, the notion of a page is something we may not be working on a daily basis. They might be working more on pieces of content, but still they need to be aware that each of the pieces need to fit together and need to work well with the rest of the pieces. So we will be focusing more on the specific contents and how they are structured. The orientation and cues, once again, one thing is to do the navigation of the website, but another thing is, for example, when you're writing long text, you need to be providing some cues or orientations for people. So let's say you want to include a link that goes back to the top of the page or back to the top or the specific section. So that might fall under the author as well. You can have too many sections on a page, and you as an author may want to identify the need to provide that fallback for going backward. Then we discuss text alternatives from an authoring perspective. Especially for complex images, for charts, for graphics, we discuss that, or we plan to discuss that in the authoring curricula. Also, the alternatives to multimedia content. We said at the beginning that the authors will be dealing with content, mainly also including multimedia. So part of the job of the author is to make sure the alternatives for such multimedia contents exist. And then in forms and instructions, we plan to go once again through the different instructions, but from an authoring perspective. We're seeing nowadays that it's not just the developer or the designer who creates the forms, but content creators can create forms themselves based on existing authoring tools. So we think it's also important to make sure that the content authors understand what are the requirements and the user needs for forms. What are the essentials for teaching accessibility? What are the main takeaways, just to finish up, that we recommend all instructors to have and to pay attention to? First is involve people with disabilities. We've been discussing that in this presentation. Make sure you really cover how people with disabilities interact with the web pages, how they use their assistive technologies and their adaptive strategies. Communicate the why and the how. So it's not just about this needs to be done, but you need to make sure each time you communicate what needs to be done for accessibility, you also tie that to why this needs to be done. Why do I need to put headings here? Oh, you need to put headings because there's screen reader users who use them to navigate through the web page. Why do I need to put this specific contrast ratio here? Why doesn't it can stay as is? Well, you need to put that because that will help several people reading your website much easier and actually understanding the content more. So this is really one key aspect that you need to make sure that you cover in your teaching. Cover all disabilities. That's also important. I've seen, and I have made the mistake myself when training also, that you try to focus on the disabilities that you're more familiar with or that you know more. So this is a nice pointer that there's all disabilities, all sorts of disabilities that needs to be covered. We need to make an inclusive effort. There's been also talks in this ID24 today about inclusive design. So that's really what this is about. You need to make sure that you cover them as much as we can in terms of disability. Explain accessibility holistically. It's really about tying accessibility to other disciplines. Accessibility is not just done in itself. It really relates to other disciplines. We've discussed before the relationships between accessibility and inclusion. We also have pointers that tie accessibility to usability. So basically, ingraining or making accessibility part of the whole. And of course, last but not least, it might be kind of an obvious thing, but it's important to remember to make your teaching accessible. So it's not that you provide your materials accessible. You need to make sure all the activities you include are accessible. There might be some assessments that are not accessible for some groups of disabilities, but they are for others. But you need to make sure, if that's the case, that you provide alternatives. But overall, you need to make sure that your teaching materials, that your teaching style reaches all the audiences, including, of course, different degrees of people, different groups of people with disabilities. So just to finish up, let me give you pointers to get involved with this work. The latest version of what is already published in the W3C website is at w3.org/WAI/curricula. That's CURRI, That's where the last version of the work is published. Currently, as I said before, we have the foundation modules and the developer modules available. The editor's draft, which is where the drafts of the developing of the other remaining curricula are sitting, is at WAI-curricula, CURRICULA.netlify.app. That's where we are developing the designing and the authoring drafts. We welcome issues on GitHub. That's the preferred way in which, if you want to raise some kind of issues, you can do that. There's at the very bottom of these pages, there's a box that says help improve this page. That's also marked with a heading of level 2, I think. So that's easy to find with screen readers and assistive technologies. And there's links so that you can put your GitHub issues, or you could write an email if you don't find comfortable with GitHub yourself. Just as a nice pointer before we wrap up, there is already an implementation of this WAY curricula. To be specific, there's an implementation of the foundation modules in a free online course that W3C WAY has developed with UNESCO. We've had a number of participants, of instructors from several organizations that have helped develop this course, and it's really recommended for everybody. Even though you have some knowledge of accessibility, it's a very good refresher. I have taken that course myself, and I've actually learned something. You do learn something new every day, even though that sounds like a very typical sentence. A big thank you for everybody. Thank you for having attended this talk. It's a pleasure for me, as I said at the beginning. It's a pleasure for WAY to be here, and I'm turning over to the crew here for questions or for follow-ups. As I say, thank you for that. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daniel. That was a really good talk, and frankly, just very, very timely. I spoke earlier and was asked, where do I go if I need to start, and where's the best resource to get started with? And I actually mentioned the curricula. I was fortunate enough to contribute to one of the modules. Thank you so much. We will be tweeting that far and wide. Steve, do we have any questions? And you'll need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, God, hold on. Be there in a sec. Questions, yes. Yes, I do. One of the questions I had is that what are the licenses that this information is available under? Are you able to reuse and modify for your own purposes?
This is really it's open to everybody to use. You need to quote that it's where it comes from. Yep, that's really as usual in W3C stuff. You need to you can use that, you can reproduce that, but you really need to quote that this is from W3C WAY. Yeah. So
it's just attribution. I mean, my understanding is that this information and these curricula are designed to, for widespread use and get the message out there as far as accessibility is concerned. So to that end, also, as far as people contributing, you mentioned it was up on GitHub, so anybody can file an issue or file a PR pull request on the content that's there.
Absolutely, yeah. I was trying to do the specific license type that we're using. We're using Creative Commons Attribution 4.0, so that's really it. It's really, we're really eager to to spread the word out about accessibility. We're really looking forward for people to include these bits and pieces in their existing courses, or to create courses based on what we have here.
Yeah, I think that I've been dipping in and out of W3C WCAG and accessibility the way for years now, and I think it's a much really positive and healthier place where the people from wide-ranging people from the community worldwide can get involved, a little bit or a lot. I think that's really important, because obviously, I mean, you're on the W3C staff, but you have, there's only a limited amount of people that are actually doing that work and full time. So you need as much help as you can get.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's very true. And the more people get involved and the more people contribute, the more, first of all, the more quality the work is going to have, and second, the more robust the work is going to be. It doesn't only apply to WCAG, it does really apply to the other resources that especially the education and outreach working group is developing. So I hope so. I hope people find the environment a positive environment. We try to address all the issues as much as we can. Yeah, really looking forward for that.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have any other questions, Henny.
Actually, I just one quick question from the floor. I think we've got time for just one more. Is the curricula approved by the IAAP?
Well, that's a very good question. I really thank you for that. So first of all, we haven't finished yet. This is really a multi-part effort. It's 4 parts, and we have 2 of them available. The other 2 we're working on. So to seek approval, I think it's a little bit early at this point. Now,
sorry, go on.
Sorry, if we are going to do that or not, then or if they are, we are in conversations. There's really a good relationship with IAAP. So I hope when this work is more robust and it's finished, we probably, or I hope we can get in touch with them and see if we can have their I don't know if their approval or their support or however that materializes. That's something I can't really precise at the moment, but yeah, we have good relations with them, and we hope we can continue working together.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because that by approval, I think that you may mean that it's an approved course. So when you're doing an IAP certification, that you can use it. But I mean, as far as IAP, but it also tends to imply that IAP is some sort of supranational national body that it sort of has more credence and authority over accessibility than WAI, which I don't think it is. So it's an important point, but at the same time, I wouldn't shy away from using the WAI stuff, because the ways where it's always happened and continues to.
Just if you give me 30 seconds or a minute or something, we haven't really talked about how WAI develops their resources. We haven't really talked about the WAI process, because I really ran out of time. Shame on me on that. But there's really involvement, not just from international bodies, which of course there are governmental organizations involved in this work. There are organizations working on accessibility that are also involved in this work. There are disability organizations that are also involved in this work. There are people with disabilities themselves working on this. So the vetting process that these resources undertake is really, really high. So I really think when we finish the other 2 parts that are remaining, we're going to have, or we expect to have, a really robust curricula that has been vetted by all of these really accessibility aspects around the world, all of these organizations working on accessibility, all these governmental organizations. So that's really the process. It takes some time, but it's really worth the effort and the try, because you end up with a much more quality on whatever you develop.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. That was a really good talk, and thank you, Steve, for the questions. For everybody listening, if you like the session, please do hit the YouTube like button. We'd love to get up to the next round of 1,000. And don't forget, you can subscribe to YouTube /Inclusive Design 24 to be kept into the loop of our future events and catch up with previous talks from previous years. A reminder that ID24 is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website. And that Inclusive Design 24 is brought to you with thanks to our sponsors, who are Intopia, Fable, TPGI ARC, Adobe, Tetralogical, Intuit, InfoAxia, Centre for Inclusive Design, Web Directions, AAA, Adrian Roselli, LLC, and CannyXS. Inclusive Design will be back at the top of the hour in just 5 minutes, where we hope to see you all then. Thank you.
See you later. Thanks. Bye, Henny. Bye, Daniel.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.